Hello, welcome to Civilization Jihad Awareness, the show where we shine a lot of light on that problem we call taqiyya and the misinformation from the Islamic, the Islamic people who are just definitely trying to give us misinformation. Today we have an incredible guest, Mr. Joseph Humire. Now, Mr. Joseph Humire, I'm hoping I'm saying this correctly, Humire, is an incredible author and writer, and he's an expert specializing in asymmetric warfare. Since 2010, Mr. Humire has been engaged in ongoing investigation into Iran and Hezbollah's presence and activities in the Western Hemisphere. His research resulted in a leading policy report released in July 2014 titled Canada on Guard, revealing an immigration security scheme between Iran, Venezuela, and Cuba. In October 2014, Mr. Humire co-edited the most authoritative book on the topic, Iran's Strategic Penetration of Latin America, published by Lexington Books. In addition, he has been invited by several entities within the United States Department of Defense and intelligence communities to brief on the subject matter, and has testified several times before U.S. Congress as well as the Canadian Parliament on July 9, 2013. Mr. Humire testified before the House Homeland Security Committee, to which Argentine Special Prosecutor Alberto Nisman was invited, but unable to participate. Moreover, Mr. Humire traveled to 12 countries throughout Latin America, briefing policymakers and defense officials on the growing influence of Iran and Hezbollah in the region. A regular commentator on major English and Spanish language media outlets, Mr. Humire is an opinion leader on Islamic extremism in the Americas. He is currently the executive director of the Center for Secure Free Society and an 8-year veteran of the U.S. Marine Corps, serving combat tours in Iraq and participating in a multinational training exercise in Latin America. Now, I got to meet Mr. Humire briefly at CPAC a couple weeks back, and what really shocked me was the amount of information he had on Iran's involvement in Latin America. I guess what really got me is how much I considered myself ignorant of this topic because of how much I'm concentrating on what's happening here in North America and just becoming aware of what's happening in Europe. And Civilization Jihad is such a world activity. So I do want to tell you I am doing this show today all by phone, thanks to Cal Fritzy, who is running the studio. I am in Rochester, New York, in one of those without electricity right now. So I'm sitting as close as I can to a window and running the show from here, and ask Kel if she could tell me if Mr. Humire is signed in yet. This gentleman wrote a report, and I want to talk to you about that report since he's not here yet. It's called After Nisman, How the Death of a Prosecutor Reveals Iran's Growing Influence in the Americas. Joseph Humire has written so extensively on this. To me, it's mind-blowing. This particular topic should be on the airwaves everywhere. That particular topic, people should pay attention to the new things that are happening this week. Take a look at the new articles in Gatestone. I'll see if I can pull some of those up in a minute and read them to you. I'm concerned that under this past president, the permissive, I hate to call him president after reading this, because we had something called the Monroe Doctrine telling people to keep your hands off Latin America. We'll protect them. What we consider them, that we should not be allowing other countries to come in and try and take over. Keeping that policy in mind, the Monroe Doctrine in mind, you also have to think about what it would mean for a foreign country to come in to a Latin American country usually impoverished. They're not as industrialized as we are, and try and take over, or coming in and heavily influencing them financial-wise. Iran has the money, and thanks to us, they have tons of it. This last president gave them tons. So what are they doing? And this is, all I can say is I'm really, really shocked. I hope Mr. Humire signs in soon. I don't want to read his entire article and steal some of his thunder, but I'm just going to give you this is from the executive summary of this article. It says, for the Islamic Republic of Iran, 2016 is a landmark year. In January, it completed the necessary first steps mandated by this Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. An estimated 150 billion of Iranian assets were unfrozen and international economic sanctions were lifted. Several countries in Europe, Asia, and Latin America lined up to welcome Iran back into the global economy. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, set a target of 8% annual growth for the next 5 years, while other economics analysts forecast that within a decade, Iran's GDP might surpass that of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. Beyond a financial shot in the arm, Iran's greatest achievement from this controversial nuclear deal is its newfound legitimacy that it is beginning to capitalize on in Latin America. The late Alberto Nisman, special prosecutor for the 1994 bombing of the AMIA Jewish Cultural Center in Argentina, spent well over a decade investigating Iran's support of terrorist networks throughout Latin America. The findings in Nisman's investigation were a stark reminder of Iran's troubled history with international terrorism. His tragic death on January 18, 2015, arguably most benefited Iran since it resented Nisman for presenting an obstacle in Tehran's pursuit of international legitimacy. Nisman's most recent case, presented on January 14, 2015, a week before the death, accused members of Argentina's former government of engaging in a criminal plot with Iranian officials to cover up Tehran's role in the 1994 AMIA bombing. This case, however, was only a partial revelation of Argentina's realignment with Iran. Nisman's murder was most likely the result of his enemies fearing further revelations. Gatestone Institute, Canada's new blasphemy laws. This is by Khadija Khan. It says a resolution M103 seeking to condemn so-called Islamophobia was introduced a few weeks ago in the peaceful country of Canada by Liberal Party MP IQRA Khalid in the House of Commons, sparking a controversy. A similar motion, labeled M37, was later tabled in the Ontario Provincial Legislature by MPP Nathalie Desrosiers on February 23, 2017, and was passed by the provincial parliament. M37, like its predecessor, demanded that lawmakers condemn all forms of Islamophobia and reaffirm a support for government efforts through anti-racism. Okay, Islam is not a race. This is just insane. So even by stating this, they are trying to declare, this is important, you understand, they're trying to declare Islam a race by doing this also. So legally, if they do this, it'd be interesting to see if they have officially gotten away with declaring Islam a race through this M37 issue in Canada. Scary concept. So if they can do that, will they legislate Islam being a race? Now, that's not something I had thought they were going to do, but it sounds like the trickiness. This is one of the things you notice with it. Muslims try to control the language. They try to control the word choice that you have to use for yourself. And this is one of the difficulties we have. Until we do something, change that, we have problems. So what I'm going to do while we're waiting. And unfortunately, me without electricity, I'm going to go back into some of the history of what we're fighting, which is the Muslim Brotherhood. We are fighting the Muslim Brotherhood here in the United States by not declaring them a terrorist group. We have issues. And what's happening down south with what Humire is talking about is the Shiite fighting the Shiites down. And I say that fighting because we have to be aware. And this past president did nothing to stop the furtherance of Islam throughout the world. And I say did nothing because he had options. He could have said, hey, we have the Monroe Doctrine here. You cannot come into and try to heavily influence and control another country in Latin America. He had a choice to do that. Did nothing. Now, that was a chance. I mean, we have to stand tall as Americans. How do we do that? How do we protect ourselves when we're bringing the enemy, we're allowing the enemy to find a foothold, a few hundred miles, a few thousand miles south of us? This is dangerous. This is just dangerous. And this is one of the things we have to worry about. It's crazy. It's just the concept is crazy. So, again, what Mr. Humire will be talking about is the Shiites, the Iranians. What I'm talking about is Sunnis. Now, understand, the Muslim Brotherhood is predominantly Sunni. However, they get along quite well when they're talking about attacking who? America. Who? They have no problems attacking America and Israel together. In fact, Hamas will go, which is part of a chapter of the Muslim Brotherhood, will go to Iran to get money to attack who? Israel. So the enemy of their enemy is their friend. So that's how they have this version of as long as you're classified Muslim, we will work together to attack an enemy. And this is an important understanding that many people do not get. They'll work together financially, whatever. Okay. So going back to the joy of being live radio and the joy of weather, which is, for me, I don't know if you can hear it. It's bad out here in Rochester.
Hi, Paul. How's it going?
Hi. So it's bad here in Rochester, and the weather is just it's.
Are you up in New York?
Yeah, I'm in Rochester, New York, and we actually sent kids when we at the end of the school day today. We not only sent them home, we made sure our walkers had bus rides home.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was kind of odd, but I walk 1.5 miles home, and as I'm walking home, I see huge branches being torn off trees. One is still sticking straight up out of the ground while I was coming home. I was like, okay, I guess that was a good idea to get kids bus rides home.
Oh, no, it's definitely different weather than here. Here's been very nice, actually, kind of spring-like a little bit in Washington.
Well, it was spring-like. It was in the 60s, 70s, in the 60s today. So what I wanted to talk about is your incredible – you gave an incredible speech at CPAC. And to me,
appreciate it.
I kind of feel like I'm new to the whole concept of – I'm new with the radio thing, first of all, to tell you, but I've been researching civilization jihad for about 5, 6 years now. And you opened a whole other Pandora's box, so to speak, when you started to talk about Iran and Latin America, and I was just mind blown. I didn't have a concept of how vast this concept of Islamization or spying and getting into Latin America. I didn't even conceive of it. I'm looking at the mass migration into Europe, and okay, that's pretty overt. But I had no idea the amount of covert activity happening in Latin America. And I spent a lot of the past few days reading your report after Niesman, and I'm just, oh my gosh! Would you mind telling people about this work that you've done on this? It's just incredible.
Sure. I appreciate it. First, thanks, Paul, for the invitation. So the report you're referencing actually is a good starting point because Islamic terrorism isn't necessarily new to Latin America. As a matter of fact, the largest Islamic terrorist attack in the Western Hemisphere prior to September 11th in 2001 was actually two attacks in Buenos Aires, Argentina, all the way on the south of South America, where they bombed the Israeli embassy in 1992 and in a Jewish culture center called the Amia in 1994. Collectively, those two attacks killed 114 people and seriously injured over 300. Those attacks were attributed to Lebanese Hezbollah, but with the cooperation and assistance of the Islamic Republic of Iran. So those were those were, if you want to call it, Latin America's 9/11 before our 9/11 woke us up to the threat of radical Islamic terrorism. And so if you start from that as a starting point, in that report, basically, as you know, it covers that attack and it describes what happened in that attack. And unfortunately, the problem's only gotten worse since then. At that time, Hezbollah, Iran, even a little bit later, Al-Qaeda, they had a presence in Latin America, but it was very, I'll call it a subterranean presence. It was done through covert networks, mosques, culture centers, and they basically established a cultural presence, if you want to call it that, to be able to create a logistical network that would support their terror activity. However, now we're talking now more than 20, actually, going on to close to 25 years now, after that bombing in Buenos Aires. Now they have official presence. I mean, the Iranian government it went from 6 embassies back in that period to now 11. It has 11 embassies in the region that are largely used as intelligence centers. Hezbollah is now present in just about every country, and they not only become embedded in terror activity, but they're very, very, very implicated in drug trafficking. I'd say, during the period of the sanctions against Iran, Hezbollah got most of its revenue from drug trafficking. And obviously that's going to come wholesale in Latin America. So since the 90s and the period that we had the Amia bombing, Iran and Hezbollah has matured into a very robust presence and a very powerful presence in Latin America, where they have penetration in particular countries even greater than the United States. For example, Venezuela. In Venezuela, the Islamic Republic of Iran and its Hezbollah proxies has a greater presence and influence in the country of Venezuela than the United States does. And that's just a fact. So my research has basically been trying to uncover that and map it and understand it and analyze it and see how that creates or presents a threat to U.S. national security.
Could you tell us how you ended up getting into this particular area of research?
Yes, that's a good question. So I have, I was a former Marine, so my background in the military is obviously more in the Middle East. I was in Iraq in 2003. And, I spent some time looking at some of the Iranian networks in the southern part of Iraq. But moving past when I got out of the Marine Corps, I went to study at a university here, and I studied abroad in Latin America, so that, my regional area of interest has always been Latin America. And it was really about 2010, if I remember right, or 2009 or 2010, and I was asked to look at the tri-border area. It's a very interesting area in South America. It's where Argentina, Brazil, and Paraguay intersect. It's the crossroads of those three countries. And it's actually considered like the wild, wild west by U.S. law enforcement and the intelligence community, because you have pretty much every element of organized crime present at this crossroads, at this tri-border area. And historically, that's where Hezbollah essentially began its presence in this side of the world. So I started looking at that back in 2010, I'd say. And when I used to go down there to look at the Hezbollah presence down in the tri-border area, everyone would talk about, the Nisman case, the case of Argentina. People would talk about Venezuela, and it just kind of graduated from there. So every year since 2010, it's like an onion. I kept unraveling another piece of the onion and just start realizing that the problem is bigger than what I imagined. And I to this day, I've been looking at this for now 6 or 7 years, and I still only believe I know maybe 15% of the problem set. I don't feel like I have a handle on the entire influence that they have down south. So that's kind of how I got started. It's what led me to today.
It's an amazing feat to watch in your piece. It's, to me, when I'm going through this, you talk about what the Attorney General there had done, the research he had pulled out, and you were starting to connect the dots with the the halal foods.
Oh,
Which
yeah.
to me was, I was reading that now. It's, to me, there's another interesting factor there, is we've had a host with our network who has taken me to task for not going into and looking into halal foods here in America, because he believes that that's highly connected to terrorism. And what you discovered regarding halal foods in Latin America is really mind-blowing.
Yeah, it's absolutely the case. And so just so your listeners can get a sense of the report, it's called After Nisman. It's on our website at securefreesociety.org. So it's a report that discusses, and so it discusses the case in Argentina. And Alberto Nisman, who's the prosecutor who you mentioned, Alberto Nisman was a special prosecutor for the bombing in '94. He basically was assigned in 2004. He was assigned to investigate that bombing because they never were able to come to a final conclusion as to who committed the attack. So he investigated the attack. In 2006, he presented an indictment before the Argentine courts against 9 individuals, 8 Iranians and 1 Lebanese. And these aren't your everyday individuals. This is, on the Lebanese individual was Imad Mughniya, one of the highest level Hezbollah leaders. The former president of Iran, Rafsanjani, the former defense minister, the former foreign minister. So these are high-level former Iranian government functionaries. And so he presents this case. And when I looked at it, when I studied the Amia case, I found some things that Nisman had touched on but really didn't elaborate on. And one of them is what you're talking about, the halal the halal certification companies. So let me try to unpack that a little bit so folks can understand. One of the ways that we have to really start to examine on how terrorism operates is the logistical and financial support to terrorism. Matter of fact, it's the logistical and financial support is usually how counterterrorism officials are able to neutralize plots, because they're able to figure out how the money's flowing, or how the communications are flowing in one direction or another, so they can identify these networks. In the case of the Amia bombing, the bombing in Argentina and Buenos Aires in 1994, the financing of that attack happened through basically beef trade. It happened through the commercial trade of beef between Argentina and Iran. Back in the 80s, Argentina was one of the world's top providers of beef. And it had, I think it was within the top 5 of the top 5 exporters of beef in the world. Iran, by 1989, 80% of Iran's domestic consumption of beef came from Argentina. So 80% of the beef that they ate and they consumed in Iran was originated from Argentina. So there was a legitimate commercial link between Iran and Argentina. In fact, the only legitimate commercial link between Iran and Argentina was beef. But because obviously Iran's an Islamic republic, there's a certification process to have that beef imported. It can't just come imported directly. It has to be certified by a process called halal. And I believe halal actually means process. That's the definition of the word. And what that halal process is similar to kosher. It's basically a certification by an Islamic cleric that says that this beef was groomed and processed in a way in accordance with Islamic law. So, there's basically a certain amount of steps and criteria, like the cow has to be facing Mecca, and there's all these things, the criteria that has to be met so that the beef can be certified so that it's allowed to be consumed in Iran. So because they have this huge trade between Iran and Argentina in beef, and because Islamic law mandates that they certify it in halal, that was the perfect pretext for Iran to insert its spies, subversives, intelligence officers, and IRGC officials into the country. Because if you have, let's say you have 5 Iranian state-owned companies in the country, right? It doesn't make sense to have 15 commercial attachés for 5 companies. That would draw a red flag. The Argentine authorities would be like, why do you have 15 commercial attachés when you have only 5 companies? But if you have, let's say, 2 commercial attachés and you have 5 companies, but you have 15 cultural attachés, that doesn't draw as much of a red flag, because you say we need these cultural attachés to certify the halal, or to give it the halal certification of the beef. So that was the pretext that the Iranian government used to take their embassy in Buenos Aires, to take it from 3 individuals in 1983 to 63 individuals in 1993, a year before the Amia attack, and most of those individuals were supporting the Hezbollah elements that bombed the building in Buenos Aires. So that was it's basically high-end tradecraft, top-end cover platform to be able to. It's state sponsorship of terrorism. That's what it is.
It's mind-blowing. I mean, and you talk about in your report, you talk about how I was talking about the halal certification, and one of those gets caught as having been taking part in the financing, and the report reveals that at one point, they went after people and they started to say, well, you shouldn't be here. You're responsible, and this prosecutor's work is mind-blowing, and all he ever got to do was indict. Am I correct?
Well, he took the case to the full extent of the Argentine judicial process. He got an Argentine court to accept the indictment and to issue arrest warrants on these Iranian officials. He also got the Interpol court. He went to France in 2007 and presented his evidence before Interpol, and he got the Interpol court to issue red notices, which is equivalent to an international arrest warrant on these Iranian officials. So that's about the extent that a prosecutor could take it. The Iranian government never acknowledged any of this, and so they essentially just whitewashed the whole thing. And actually that comes to the second part of the report, because it's important for, I guess, your listeners to know that prosecutor is now dead. He was working on this case from 2004 to 2015, so about a decade. And in 2013, he started to ratchet up again and started to present more evidence that the Iranians were behind nefarious activity in Argentina and Latin America. And in 2015, he presented his final case, which was his indictment, it actually wasn't an indictment. It was a criminal complaint against the former Argentine president, Cristina Fernández de Kirchner, and accused her of being complicit with the Iranians, to basically coming together to whitewash their involvement in the bombing. So let me just emphasize that. That would be equivalent to, let's say, the Obama or the Bush administration to going to a deal with the Taliban, making a deal with the Taliban to reinvestigate 9/11. That's the kind of thing that happened in Argentina. The people that were accused of being behind the attack were now in cahoots with the government in Argentina. And since he was a prosecutor for the judiciary of Argentina, he submitted a criminal complaint against the president. A week after he submitted his complaint, he was found dead in his apartment in Buenos Aires. And so my report, why it's called After Nisman, is because it in a way tries to shed light on the implications of his death and who benefited from his death, and tries to continue his work by revealing more connections to the public.
And that to me is part of the most interesting part. What I find fascinating is the, I don't know if wiretaps is the right word, some of the recorded calls that are in there, and they really reveal the connections. To me, I was again, this whole concept, I had not even, until I'd listened to you at CPAC, I was really impressed. I could not even, it was just leaps and bounds in an area where I just wasn't ready to accept. And you talked about, was it the tri-state, or is it?
Tri-border.
Tri-border. People have to understand, when he's talking about a Wild West, it's not a safe place. And you paint that pretty well in the article. I when I first read the concept, I was trying to figure it out, and you paint it quite well in the article. So you have to understand that, again, he's not just talking about Argentina as a whole. In this article, it encompasses, I believe there was like 4 or 5 other countries in addition that were also implicated in this. Colombia, I believe, was one, and Venezuela is another, and I cannot remember the other ones.
Brazil, Chile, and Peru.
Yeah. They're all mentioned in this article because the Iranian influence is far more extensive than I guess I could ever dream. I had no concept. I'm still kind of mind blown. Still trying to swallow all this.
It's important to kind of think about it this way, and I can understand a lot of people when they first look at this, it's a little bit hard to swallow that you think, is the Iranians that big in Latin America? How come you don't see them? They're not that visible. Well, there's 2 things I think that will help you conceptualize it. One is, in the Middle East, folks that follow the Middle East, we understand how the Shia crescent has evolved. We understand how Iran has basically used its intelligence services and its military to basically subvert about 4 or 5 different countries in the region, right? So they control Iraq, they control Syria, they control Lebanon. They're increasingly taking more influence in Turkey, in Bahrain, and even in Yemen. So if you just look at how they operate and the way they use their covert action to basically subvert countries and take control of their governments and align them with their interests and objectives, that capacity has been exported to Latin America. And Latin America is not ready for it. I mean, they're doing that at a high level in the Middle East, with U.S. involvement, with Russians and Chinese and all this, a much bigger geopolitical playing field. To come in Latin America, where pretty much the U.S. is absent, it's much easier for them. There's really no competition. So that's one way to look at it. The second way to look at it is that look at it from an Iranian perspective. The Iranians, in the Middle East, they see themselves surrounded by U.S. presence. I mean, they look to the left, they see us in Iraq. They look to the right, they see us in Afghanistan. So I think since basically since the turn of the century, they made a strategic calculation to ratchet up their presence in the Western Hemisphere because they want to be able to provide a credible threat to the United States geographically the way we do, the way they consider that we do in the Middle East. So they want to diminish the geographical disadvantage. And I think that's logical for what they want to do in terms of the global pursuit for international legitimacy.
One of the things you mentioned in your article is that there was a large cash fund, amount, it was $800,000 that was discovered that was supposed to go to that past president of Argentina,
Christina Kirchner.
And what the other thing that's of interest, well, now we're talking about follow the money. People keep saying follow the money. So when you read about this $800,000, you're thinking, well, that's a lot of money. And you start thinking about leaders of countries. Well, is $800,000 enough to influence a leader of a country? Well, the truth of the matter is that was one of, I think you record several payments. Yeah. So she might not have missed the $800,000 very badly because of the word several payments.
Yeah. There's several kickbacks and several sweeteners that I think. So that's actually an interesting story because that's not something that I knew about initially. Actually, I consider myself more of a Latin America expert than an Iran expert, so I kind of approached this more from a regional perspective. But that case of the $800,000 that were sent to the at the time she was a candidate for president who eventually became the president, Christina Kirchner in Argentina. Those $800,000 were considered a bribe, a sort of corruption of political influence by Hugo Chavez, the late president of Venezuela. They even have a term for that case. It's called the maletinazo. Maletin is like suitcase in Spanish because the $800,000 was delivered in a suitcase. It was all in a suitcase. And so for Latin American experts that are familiar with the regional politics, they always understood that to be, that's Hugo Chavez giving his regular political bribes to buy out politicians in other countries. We knew that he had done that in several countries, so that wasn't a tremendous surprise. What happened was many years later, and even after the death of Hugo Chavez, because Hugo Chavez died in 2013, in 2015, through the work of a really great journalist at a investigative journalist at a very prestigious Brazilian magazine called Veja, he found out that the origins of that money didn't lie with Hugo Chavez, didn't lie with Venezuela. The origins of that money came from Iran, and that it was Iran, particularly Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the former president of Iran, who asked Hugo Chavez to buy his way into Argentina. He said, we need to get to Argentina because we need access to their nuclear program. The only way we're going to do that is if you get us in there. And Hugo Chavez said, don't worry, I will take care of it, and then started sending money over to the then presidential candidate, Christina Kirchner, who became president, which explains a lot of things. It explains why she signed this memorandum of understanding with Iran. It explains why she took Argentina's foreign policy on a complete 180-degree about-face and reoriented towards Iran. You got to understand that in Argentina's foreign policy, Iran, since the Amia bombing, since the 94 bombing, has been considered an adversary. It was not considered a friend to the Argentine Republic. It was accused of being involved in one of the largest terrorist attacks in their country. So obviously it was not a country that they were sympathetic with. But Christina Kirchner, in a matter of a few years, reoriented their foreign policy towards Iran, and now we may know why. because she probably got, like you said, she obviously didn't get this payment because this one actually got intercepted, and the guy that was delivering the payments in jail in Miami now. So she didn't get this payment, but who knows how many payments she did get, and actually paid her off to basically put themselves in position with Iran. So it's a very interesting story. It's actually one that caught me by surprise as well.
I'm still. It's going to take me a while to get back into really looking at this. And you consider yourself a Latin American expert more, which is interesting, because then you actually understand the people more and get this to have a better connection with the people down there, which will help. Are you visiting down there quite a lot? Because I think I read and was reading your bio, and it was like, was it 12 some odd countries down there that you're interacting with?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time in Latin America, and I direct a center here in Washington. It's a think tank that basically we work with what we call international fellows. So we have different members of our think tank in different countries, and they're sort of our country representatives or our country researchers. So I spend a lot of time traveling. I travel about once a month, usually to a different country, and I interface with our partners downrange. I do a lot of field research. I think the quality of for example, the report you're reading and other reports that we produce, the quality of it is derived from field work. There's too many people in Washington that write about things or comment about things without ever visiting the places that they comment about. And I find it very difficult to talk about foreign policy or national security if you don't actually know what's happening on the ground. And things change so quickly that you have to be spun up. So so my mantra is to basically, be in constant communication and go down there and actually see what's going on, talk to people, so I spend a lot of time in Latin America, and even the Latin Americans themselves are starting to wake up to this conundrum of the Iranian presence and influence. It's something that they themselves didn't see.
Now, my question, to take it a step farther, is are there school textbooks being influenced by Islamic misinformation like they are here in the United States? That'd be my next question.
What was it again?
School textbooks, are they being influenced? Here in New York State, just to give you a clue as how badly education is influenced by Islamic misinformation. New York State requires their teachers to teach something called, they teach, the concept they're supposed to teach is Islam spread through cultural diffusion. Now, the funny thing is, the SUNY system, which is the State University of New York press, they have the SUNY, that's their college system has a press, and they publish the Al-Tabari series, which is Islamic history on the conquest of everything that was Islam, that was Islamic. So they publish one thing saying, it's all through, Islam spread through the sword with Islamic histories, but they force you to tell the students in the 10th grade, that you're supposed to tell them to say Islam spread through cultural diffusion, which is, you're saying, through the gold and salt trade. So we're giving conflicting messages in New York State, but I don't know if they're doing anything. I mean, we have the textbooks are really, really bad. There's anything that we get on Islam is misinformation. And I catch that.
In Latin America, I'd say it's a little bit less developed as it is here in North America or in the U.S. I'd say there's an interesting, this is kind of stepping away from Iran for a second, but this is an interesting kind of like anecdote. So I was in Brazil, I think it was like a few years ago. It might have been 2012 or 13, and I was at a mosque, a Sunni mosque in Brazil. And when I used to go down there, I used to tour the mosque and just get a sense of how they are and who's running them and stuff. And I picked up a pamphlet, I guess a book or one of the things that they were printing. And actually, now that you mentioned it, was a children's book. It was a children's book that was I guess they handed out to children that attend the mosque. And I looked in the back cover, and it said printed in Washington D.C. And so it was actually in Portuguese because I'm in Brazil. So it's in Portuguese, but it was originally disseminated and printed out of the one of their offices here in Washington. So it was kind of an interesting little anecdote. But on the Iranian side, listen, I've been asked this question a lot of times. Conversions aren't aren't. I don't believe that to be their ultimate goal. I mean, I think they work at it. They obviously do proselytization, and they work to introduce Islamic texts into different aspects of society. And I think they may have that as a long range goal, but understanding that Latin America is a very Catholic Christian country or region, and the Pope is from Argentina, it's a long stretch to basically get mass conversions to Islam. That said, the Iranians are very smart, and I think they've taken what we would call maybe a ecumenical approach to the diffusion of Islam, which basically means that they don't, and I've noticed this on certain elements of some of their networks down there, they don't try to say that you have to convert to Islam, but you have to accept Islam. That's the message that they're bringing, and they bridge the gap between the Latin American leftists and the Iranian Revolution. They bridge that through anti-imperialism. That's the thread that binds them together. Because when they go to Latin America, obviously they just talk about the 12th Imam and Imam Mahdi and all that stuff. It doesn't resonate as much, but they talk about the anti-imperialist roots of the Iranian Revolution, and that resonates with many people in Latin America. So their ability to penetrate society is done in a different way, I think, in Latin America than it is in other parts of the world, particularly in the Middle East.
I think that's pretty close to, in some ways, what it's doing here, because they're working together. The leftists are working together with the Islamists here. It's very, very close. It may not be the exact methodology or terminology that they're binding on, but it's very, very close.
Yep.
And I'm again, it's an amazing concept. I want to thank you for joining us. I'm just amazed, and thank you for your service for this country. And please continue what you're doing. Would you tell everybody more how they can again follow what your work, and how they can if they choose to donate to your cause?
Yeah, sure. So
please tell them how to do that.
Absolutely. I direct a center. It's called the Center for Secure Free Society. We're a global national security think tank that started in 2012. Our website is securefreesociety.org. You can go on our website and read the report that we were referencing, other reports, a lot to do with Islamic extremism in Latin America, but we do other stuff. We looked at the Russian networks, the Chinese networks. We looked at ISIS and other developments. So we have a broader range, but I particularly focus a lot on the Iranian Hezbollah problem set. I also co-edited a book on the topic. It's called Iran's Strategic Penetration of Latin America, that you can find on Amazon. And so you can follow us through our website. You can follow me through Twitter. My name, JM Humire. And I'd be happy to interface. And thanks you again for inviting me to your show. I'm glad you enjoyed the talk at CPAC, and it's a pleasure to exchange our ideas and information.
Well, thank you. We'll have to have you back sometime in the near future.
Absolutely.
When I have electricity.
Yeah, good luck with the weather up there.
Yeah, well, maybe I'll get a day off of work. I'm a teacher, so maybe I'll get a day off tomorrow if it continues like this. Thank you again. God bless.
No problem. Good luck.